On today's episode, I've got the man that signed Coldplay to their first ever record deal.
Chatting Tracks. Let's talk music.
Thanks, Robbie, and welcome to Chatting Tracks. Let's talk music indeed. I've got a fantastic episode for you today. I've got label boss and author Simon Williams. Is he a label boss or just a cool dude that runs a record label? I think it's that one. He's such a cool guy. He wrote a book called Pandemonium, How Not to Run a Record Label. And in this book, he covers his early years, going to gigs and loving music, becoming a journalist, his time at XFM as a DJ, and also starting the most independent record label, hands down in the country, which is fantastic, Fierce Panda. Now, to list Fierce Panda's artists would take all day, but I'll give you a few. Keane, Coldplay and Ash. It's a brilliant label. They've got amazing punk ethos and it still works to this day. They're still going. They formed in the 90s and they're still going to this day. They're going to be a link in the description to the website so you can find it. You can see who they've signed and what they're doing and just buy the records on there because it's an amazing, amazing label. So, full disclosure, in Simon's book, he did make a suicide attempt, and we talk about suicide attempts and self-harm in this book. If you know anybody that's going through the same sort of problems or you feel could be on that journey, please let them hear this interview or send Simon's book to them and let them read it because it will show you there's light at the end of the tunnel. And it's just an amazing book about recovery and music. It's incredible. I got the audio book of it and Simon narrates it, and to hear him saying it in his own words literally hits you harder than when you read it on the page. But if someone needs this book, please pass it on. It could save someone's life. It's incredible. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Check out Fierce Panda's website and I'll see you on the next one. Ta-da! Your book's fantastic and we'll get into it in a minute, and it covers a lot of stuff, so we're going to try and get as much in as we can. But so your house growing up, was it a musical house? Were your parents into music?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It was only my mum, she loved music, and we had a piano, a guitar, a flute, an oboe, and I think it was just she was desperate for me to sort of follow her talented path. I think she just went wrong by getting me to try and learn the flute, which as a 13-year-old kid in 1977 wasn't a good thing. I didn't even like Jethro Tull or James Galway, and those are the popular artists at the time. So that kind of just put me off for life, and I just worked out then that mine would be a life in the musical shadows. But not these shadows, obviously. That's
I don't remember you in that band. So, were you more of a music appreciator at a younger age than a musician?
Absolutely, yeah. I remember, Bridge Over Troubled Water was a massive hit when I was a kid. I just remember the one thing I didn't understand was the concept of her record. I think she had a massive record collection, and I remember one day on my little transistor radio hearing Bridge Over Troubled Water, and I told her they're playing one of your records, and I just completely bewildered. I had no idea that these people had like #1 albums in America or anything like that. With America, funny enough. So yeah, that was a bit of an education. But then I think that that's normally the way, isn't it? I remember seeing Thurston Moore do an AIM conference, and obviously the whole AIM ethos is to be indie than now. And they were asking him, what labels were your first, record purchases on? And there was shock and horror in the room when he went, well, it's kind of, Warner's and Capitol. The fact that those records were actually by Talking Heads and Ramones had nothing to do with it. Everyone's just shocked at the mention of a major label. But, when he was 14, 15 years old, he wasn't going down a rough trade in Brooklyn, was he? He was going down to Walmart to get his musical fixes, as we all did. My first purchase was Jilted John by Jilted John from Walthamstow High Street, Woolworths.
Fantastic. I remember the first time I got Bridge Over Troubled Waters with The Only Living Boy in New York, hearing the harmonies on that.
Yeah.
And as a young boy, I think I was about 11, 12 when I first heard it, I couldn't understand what I was listening to.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense. Because it was so beautiful and so well put together. I was like, this is alien.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful. And I love even at a young age, it can just sort of burn on you that quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Years and years later, one of the terrible curses of credibility is the fact that you can't really blow your own trumpet. So the amount of times you hear stories from Nirvana or Radiohead or whatever just going, they had no idea that Smells Like Teen Spirit was going to be a hit, or how much they hated Creep, all these stories. And then they interviewed Paul Simon about the studio art of Bridge Over Troubled Water, and he basically just kind of just did an acoustic guitar, and he said, straight away I knew this was going to be one of the greatest songs of all time. And I thought, thank Christ for that. Sometimes you've just got to go, just brilliant.
That's my guy right there.
Absolutely,
That's my guy.
yeah. And then of course Art Garfunkel gets all the credit because he sings the most amazing vocal take of all time, but that's another story.
So would that sort of album be one of the defining albums of you sort of as a child, like tuning into music and going, oh, I need to find out what more of this stuff is?
I guess so. I mean, it wasn't, I was so young, but it was so, I just remember, I saw a folk act the other day in Newcastle, and it took me straight back to being a kid when my mum became a flautist in a Morris dancing band combo, and started just playing Wishbone Ash and Fairport Convention and Steel Eye Bloody Span, and it just took me back to this horror show. So it wasn't by no stress, and she actually loved her classical music as well. But those things just didn't interest me whatsoever. It was just kind of that Simon and Garfunkel thing, whether it be the melodies or as you say, just the harmonies were just absolutely incredible, weren't they? Yeah. And then slightly too young for glam, although again massive appreciation of all the Bowie singles, and then my first true love was ELO.
Wow!
Basically, Rock Aria was the first single that really impacted. And I got Out of the Blue one Christmas, and then went back. So that was my first record. And then my second one was a New World record. I went back and got the previous album. And in fact, I had little there when I got home from London last night. It was about 1:30. And I had a little ELO disco in the back garden.
I never would have put ELO as one of those records for you.
No, well, it's just a weird thing. I'm sure I shouldn't be, like First and More. I shouldn't say these things. Just to go, my first album was the Anti-Nowhere League on, Snot Green Vinyl or something. But I just find it's, the fact that their music's just as, I mean, they were never cool at the time. They're much cooler now.
Yeah.
But they were,
like ABBA.
But in 1977, this wasn't the height of coolness. But I didn't really care, And then I kind of went from ELO to the Jam, to the Anti-Nowhere League, to the Farmers Boys, to New Order. That was basically it. And then C86. And then I joined the NME, and then obviously, I lost all taste for music completely because it was just an absolute beast of a feast with, just trying to keep up with, even back then, just trying to keep up with new acts and new releases.
So like you said, you're into the Jam and you're going to a lot of gigs, and you started to write a fanzine at this time. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, another idea that wasn't my own. I just saw Everett True when he was the legend. We were at the he was selling this magazine from a little farmer's wife's basket at the bar of the Hammersmith Clarendon, and House Martins and His Latest Flame were both playing, and I just remember looking at that, going, "That looks exciting." So I did some research and then found out that down Rough Trade Way, you had a whole ton of amazing fanzines, and it was a proper nationwide scene, which fed into the whole C86 ethos. And then by the time I joined the NME in '88, half the staff had come through their own fanzines, whether it's like Steve Lamacq or James Brown or Stephen Wells or myself, Stuart McConey, people like that. We'd all put in the hard graft. And it is hard graft, isn't it? From school magazines to fanzines. We're very strange beasts, aren't we? Why aren't we just outside having fun?
We just like being indoors.
I think it is, maybe. Yeah. But they'll be like being outdoors as well, because you've got to go to gigs to, actually to review the bands, to interview the bands, and then to sell the fanzine back to the bands.
Only indoor gigs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. I've never tried to sell a fanzine at a festival. Oh, that would be sad, wouldn't it? You'd just be walking around 2 hours later with people, but just burning them.
Keep the mozzies away.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
For people that don't know, can you explain the importance of NME C86 and what it is and why it influenced so many people?
Well, it's a weird one because I kind of, it was just, certainly on a personal level for me, I kind of, for the early 80s, again, we were just sport for choice. You had Sounds, you had Record Mirror, Smash Hits was brilliant at the time. Melody Maker was really cool. And I found NME a little bit dour, I think is the word, isn't it? They certainly next to the sort of the colour splash of, the eye-popping covers of Smash Hits. and the writing was fairly impenetrable. But C86, I don't know, they just kind of found a generation of bands. I mean, what's the stat out of the 22 bands on there? 16 of them released their first records in 1986, which is just astonishing stat. And I actually bumped into Adrian Thrills recently, one of the compilers, and I said, why weren't Hurrah on there? Because they were great in 86. He said, no, they'd have been more C83. And I thought, there was a real science to it. And again, the whole fanzine scene had helped all these bands. You had their complete support network. You had, most of the bands I saw were playing sort of student unions, whether it be ULU or Queen Mary Union. And you had that great college scene where, there was always going to be, one guy there with a long overcoat and Ian McCulloch hair. And you knew he was the nth guy who would be putting on all these bands because he'd should be reading the NME all the time. And I just found it, culturally, probably a bit namby-pamby-ish, but that meant that the bands were pretty much nice people. I was reading the What Happens to the C86 Kids book recently by Nige Tassel. And, I don't think Bobby Gillespie comes out of it too well, but generally, the bass player from the Soup Dragons and the drummer from McCarthy, it tends to be quite nice chaps. and it fed through to my time at the NME, obviously. So, going to interview or review the Wolfhounds, McCarthy, Close Lobsters, all those bands, it was kind of a really profound kind of time.
I interviewed Vicky Perks from Fuzzbox. She's on the cassette, and she's very lovely as well. Yeah. And she herself said it was just a thing for the band. So if people don't know, it was a cassette tape that came out.
Yeah.
And it just influenced everybody, and it's just an amazing cassette. I think they sell for quite ridiculous amounts of money now.
Yeah,
as well,
probably. Yeah. And the fascinating one is just that the amount of bands who either just said no to being on it, like the Junior Brides, because they thought they'd get typecast, and the other bands who just kind of, they got like £100 each, didn't they, to do demos? And some of them just like pocketed the money and just gave in new demo. And then basically every band got the cassette through. Because they thought it was going to be some stupid mail order bollocks, and then they all heard Primal Scream and the Bodines and went, "Oh, bollocks!"
Oh, I love it. So you were selling your fanzine at concerts, is that right? And then someone approached you about joining NME.
Well, not really. No, I was just doing my usual spiel. It was Pop Eat Yourself at ULU, start of '88, and I was just going around. I just did my usual thing and went up to a couple of girls. Just outside the gig room at ULU, and just said, would you like to buy a fanzine? And one of them kind of looked at the magazine cover and just said, I've been looking for you. And it turned out to be Helen Mead from the NME, because I've just kind of, been, I don't know, things you don't know what to do. You just kind of, I'll send a review to the NME and I'll write it in pencil. Why would I do that? What do you mean double spacing? I don't understand what you're talking about. And and that was it. I went in for a little meeting with her, and then she started doing live reviews, doing the old circuit. So incredibly fortuitous, really. Of all the women in all the world, in all the gigs.
That's it. Yeah. It sounded like an amazing job for a young guy. It must have been really draining and energetic. Could you describe an average week, how it would go for you?
Well, it wasn't entirely mad, because back then, normally. Gigs, the only good gigs that really happened were sort of Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. The whole idea of there being decent indie clubs putting on decent indie bands over the weekend was just absolute nonsense. And that carried on for years and years and years. Even as a promoter at venues like the Dublin Castle, you never asked for a Friday, because that was it's coaches from Colchester on the Friday that basically kept them going. We'd always ask for a Tuesday or a Wednesday. So, and then, and it was pretty much industry led. So, most of the time was certainly at the peak of the NME, you'd be doing 3 nights on the trot. Then Friday you might go out and be normal with friends, and then Saturdays was just literally lock the door and watch Match of the Day. Just I couldn't possibly do it. It confused sort of girlfriends at the time, because it's all right, let's go out, and it's like I can't face any more conversations, especially because people are going to ask me about music. So that was my sanity. Whereas now it's a bit more fluid. And along the way, one week you're in Sweden with Radiohead, the next week you're in Australia was Garbage, then you're in Japan with the Blue Tones, then you're in Derby with the Wish Plants, then you're in Preston with Ned's Stomach Dustbin. You know, it was it was weird. It's very weird. I've been like basically living that this week. You know,
Right.
on Sunday I started off. I was in Newcastle at the Generator conference, and I went there from Leeds to join the Ash in-store tour. And then they did Jumbo Records at lunchtime, and then they did the Cavern Club in the evening. So I managed to get a bonus trip to Manchester as well, because the trains from Leeds to Liverpool were cancelled, obviously, because it was Sunday afternoon. So they ended up going to Manchester, and then obviously you had to walk from the Victoria station to Piccadilly, because it's a completely different train line.
That's right, yeah.
And then finally made it to the Cavern Club, and then I went home to Suffolk on the Monday, and then Tuesday went out to Bristol, and then Bristol to London, and then etc. And it's taken me back to that time of just the absolute madness. You'd never know where you might know where you're going, but you didn't actually know where you were once you were there, you know, or what day it was or anything like that. You know, thank God for Zoom calls. I've been able to focus on that. I know, you know, because of that, it's in the diary. You know, I know what time it is. I know what day it is.
Is it one of those things where, like, a while back, I had a full-time job. I was at university on my days off, and I was DJing in the evenings.
Yeah.
And then when you look at photos from that period, you're just like a stick with a pair of eyes on it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there was, at its peak in 94, 95, I was editing the live section of the Enemy and editing the on section of the Enemy. So just dealing with new bands. And I was promoting gigs at Club Spangle at the Dublin Castle. And I was DJing on XFM, and there was something else I can't even remember. But it was all interconnected, you know, and you know, I was running Fierce Panda Records. That's it. Yeah. apart from that, there was nothing else going on in 1994. But yeah, I mean, you're young and you're excitable, and it all makes sense, you know. And basically, you know, I didn't do any of these things on my own. You know, there was a great team of writers at the NME. It was my dear friends Chris Myhill and Dave Laurie who I promoted the gigs with. XFM, obviously, you had Janice Long, Gary Crowley, Marianne Hobbs, fantastic team of DJs. And, you know, Fierce Panda was me and Ian Damaged Goods. You know, there was always a grown-up involved. And it was just, you know, we just found a way that luckily people wanted to, well, not surprisingly, people wanted to be in the NME. They quite liked being played on XFM, but they actually, because of that, it meant that they were quite happy to come and play our gigs and actually release records with us.
That's fantastic. I mean, you saw hundreds of bands over the years. What would it be that would make a band stand out to you? Like, would it be the way they interact with the crowd? Would it be the songwriting? Would it just be the crowd they would bring? Would it be an easy fix like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different elements to it, isn't it? I mean, obviously the key one is you know, Coldplay at the when I first saw them at the Falcon in Camden, and you know, I mean, they looked absolutely bloody awful. They really did. You know, he had his curly mop top hair and his tank tops and his terrible jokes and his tiny acoustic guitar, and they kind of ripped off Jeff Buckley and ripped off Radiohead, but they were absolutely compelling, and those jokes were actually, they stood out, ironic enough, because of their naffness. We just had, you know, 5 years of everyone just trying to be, you know, fucking Liam Gallagher. And God bless him, but he's not a comedian, is he? And it was just like a bolt from the blue. And I know, you know, Stephen Mack famously says that 1999 was the worst year for music ever. And on that top level, I guess, you know, the NME had resorted to putting on, you know, Gay Dad and Ultrasound and Campag Velocet. 2 out of 3 bands that are on Fierce Panda, inevitably. But you know, where we were down the Bull and Gate or down the Falcon, you know, that's where that year and the end of 98 as well, that's the first time we saw Elbow, Keane, Coldplay, Dubs, all those kind of bands coming through. And it's kind of, you know, Dubs, I remember what worked for them was it was phenomenally loud. They had a brilliant film show because they knew they looked terrible because they'd already had their dance career in Sub. So they said, okay, we're going to go down to London. We all looked so grisly and old. So they came up with a brilliant film show. And they had a guest list featuring someone from Coronation Street, someone from the Pet Shop Boys, and someone from New Order. which we presumed was just a piss take until there were all those people standing at the bar. There was Neil Tennant with Barney with Coronation Street Boy. That was good. Elbow, I thought straight off the bat, absolutely brilliant. I just saw that thing with that mix of talk with a bit of Prefab Sprout with a bit of the Blue Nile. I was absolutely smitten by that. So, you know, I mean, in a way, those bands were even those bands were cooler than Smarter than Coldplay. But I thought the key thing is always the gig, but the key thing to remember is that that's not the key thing for most people. Most people's experience is not the Falcon. Most times they just did 6 nights at Wembley Stadium. There would have been a lot of people there who had never seen them play live before. It's radio. That was the key thing. You know, Steve Matt was there. We put a single out. It gets on the radio, and then all of a sudden, all those record companies that have turned down the band because they've been standing there staring at his, you know, listening to his jokes and watching his awful hairstyle. They're all just going, well, this is different because I'm just hearing it as a song. And it's the mistake they just constantly made around that time. You know, they did the exact same with Keane. You know, Keane did loads and loads and loads of sold out gigs, but no one would sign them until they got on the radio, and then they got on the A-list at Radio 1, even on Fierce Panda, and it changed their career. Yeah,
it's the 22, isn't it? You got to get on the air to get signed. You can't get signed to get on the air. All that. Yeah. I used to play in bands in the 90s, and we had the same sort of thing, just trying to get gigs. You couldn't get gigs unless you had a manager. Yeah. You couldn't get a manager because you didn't have the gigs.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I tended to sort of avoid all that. That was never an issue for us at all. If a demo turned up and we liked it, you know, we never asked, do you have a manager? In fact, a lot of times they ended up with a manager because they were on Fierce Panda.
Right.
Because they thought, this has got momentum behind it, and, you know, let's see if we can go and get ourselves a record deal.
Yeah. Talking of Fierce Panda, can you just give us a rough overview of how you formed it? Because it's quite accidental by the sounds of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, okay. Like with everything else. Yeah. We were just, it was just 3 of us in the pub. We'd invented a scene called New Wave of New Wave, and we thought it just deserved its own tribute release. And it was essentially smashing these Animal Men. Wearing with all their Adidas chic, and it was me, Paul Moody, and John Harris in the Blue Post pub, and that's why we came up with Fierce Panda, because we thought we're only ever going to do like one release, so we can call it something as stupid as, you know, as we like. And I think John later said it was like New Wave was like Britpop without the tunes, and it certainly was the developing ground. These bands, it was all amphetamines and Adidas. And then within a year, you know, you couldn't move in Camden Town for people on drugs and wearing gazelles, and then out of that you've got all your, because the Britpop thing's actually bollocks, isn't it? Yeah. You know, the whole concept, you know, the whole concept that 1995 was year zero. I mean, Pulp, Blur, Suede all formed in the bloody 80s. They'd all been written about in the NME for 7 years. So it's just nonsense. I absolutely, even though I was working at the NME at the time, so I was ostensibly, you know, validating it. I hated that front cover. That, you know, when it was number 1 and they were fighting to get to the top of the charts. So I thought this is a tragedy. And then obviously, you know, and then we saw the fallout, which is everyone else just trying to rip those bands off for the next 4 years, and the majors falling for it. Yeah, you know, the amount of bands who got £1 million deals out of that just for being a Blur tribute band was a disgrace. And that's why they really struggled with. You know, they basically abandoned guitars, and that's why, you know, I mean, Doves did it through, started off with Rob Gretton, so we wanted to do a Dove single, but they said, we've already committed, you know, our manager's going to do it, you know, part of the factory stable, and then they signed to Heavenly. But so theirs was a fairly easy ride, but certainly Elbow, Coldplay, Keane, and Snow Patrol as well, they found it incredibly difficult to get record deals, you know, really tough. You know, Snow Patrol was virtually all over for them. And, you know, so
interestingly, reading your book again, like I was saying, I played in a band in the 90s, and we were trying to get noticed by labels like yourself and whoever, and we always thought the scene was in Manchester. We thought that's the place to go. Right. So we were desperately always trying to find and get gigs in Manchester. We're all from Essex. We're only down the road.
Whereabouts in Essex?
I'm from Grays in Essex.
Right, okay. Yeah, I mean, that's the key. That's the key to it. Essex is the easiest one, because obviously if you just say you live within, you know, 35 minutes drive of Colchester, then you've got Steve Lamacq on side, because he's a Harlow boy. I was from Walthamstow, on the borders of Essex. You've got John Peel over there in Peel Acres, which is just over the fields from my office. You know, yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. But I like that. I like the idea of, the musical nomads, kind of fine. And for, certainly for the early 90s, you're absolutely right. It was, everyone was doing the same thing when they, I think the Dylans was probably the start of the downside, and the High were probably a little bit silly as well, but they did have some really, really good songs. And I suppose they were allowed to sound a bit like the Stone Roses because they had the original guitarist, didn't they?
So, yeah. So, it's just for us, like, all the music scene at that time seemed to be Manchester based. So we were like, we're never going to get signed in London. What's the point? So little did we, anyway. So you wrote
it's true. It's true. It's the hardest thing for London bands to get signed. It's really weird because I guess it's almost like an open goal for A&R, and they always get very confused by it. Whereas they all, the amount of bands. I remember I saw the Snuts play a couple of years ago at their first London show, and I was with the A&R man from Parlophone, and I just thought, I don't know, I'm not really a fan of this. And he said at the end, what did you think of it? And I said, well, I don't suppose you did you sign them like at a sold out gig in front of loads of really, really drunk mates at King Tut's Wawa Hut in Glasgow? And he went, yeah, that's exactly how we did it. And I was thinking, yeah, no fucking surprise, They fall for it every time, Twisted Wheel in Manchester, just 150 people there, all their mates just completely smashed, and the deal was done,
Yeah.
And then they get it down to London and just, no one turned up. And you go,
that's it.
Why do we sign some London bands? This is really weird. But it's interesting now, they set up EMI North, haven't they?
Oh, have they?
So yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they've gone straight in with the, the really cool labels up there, Clue and Come Play With Me up in Leeds. And they've literally set up EMI North, and the idea is that, and then I was on a panel with Scott, who's heading it up, and that was the Generator in Newcastle. So they're trying to spread the word, and they're also trying to forge new friendships with Manchester, because apparently Andy Burnham was incredibly pissed off that EMI North didn't move to Salford. He was very angry.
Oh,
so I'm going to set up Fierce Panda Pennines. Although, judging by my experience of not being able to get from Leeds to Liverpool the other day, it wasn't a good start.
Oh, North Pole Panda, I like that.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So you did 11 years at Enemy, is that right? And then was it a natural time to leave, or was it?
Yeah. I stayed there 2 years. 2 years too long, I reckon. But I was obviously, by this point, having been trying to run the music industry for about 4 years, I was getting a bit tired. And then the label just started taking off. So it was really nice. But I should have, from a personal level, I should have left 2 years earlier. But from a professional level, I think when Q magazine shut down last year, I did think, I did feel a bit wistful and think, I'm glad I did have those 2 extra years. And in the last year I was there, I still did like 50 live reviews. I kind of went back to what I was good at. And by then, the trips were lovely, but you're getting I was on the train from going up to Walthamstow to the office, to the Panda office, and they're phoning up saying, do you want to go to Florida to interview Tricky? And you're kind of at that point where, yeah, I'll do it, but it's not the Blue Tones in Japan, is it? It's a weird thing. It's quite a weird thing to get blasé about, and I'm not proud of it, but it's just it was the nature of the beast by that point. I mean, the basic problem I've got is I just really, really like small gigs. I'm not interested in showbiz. I'm not interested in the departure lounges. It's kind of, I just really, really, my favourite new venue is Dreambags Jaguar Shoes in Shoreditch, and it's like 80 cap venue. There's no stage, no mixing desk, but there's just a brilliant sound guy doing it all with doing it all on an iPad. And it's a sister venue to the Victoria in Dalston, and it's just that's my paradise.
It's the same. I was in London with my missus a little while ago, and we were walking down some side alley, and we went over a grate, and it had that smell, that beer, fags.
Yeah.
Cheese and onion crisps.
Yeah,
and I was like, I stood there for like, she said, what are you doing? I said, just breathe that in. She's like, what are you talking about? I said, trust me, this is the smell. You need this smell in your life. That would be, I'd hang that in my car if it was a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You need those, they're brilliant. So, like you mentioned earlier, you signed Coldplay, and you released a single. Was it Brother and Sister you released?
Brothers and Sisters EP, yeah.
Yeah, and like they signed eventually to Parlophone, but they sort of broke away in a really nice way, in a degree. That was a really nice thing in the book.
I mean, they were absolute sweethearts. They were lovely to deal with. We had 6 months with them, and in the end, as I say, there wasn't, everyone turned up to see them at the second Bull and Gate gig. The entire music industry was there, but people were still a bit, I think by that point, the band decided it was either going to be Fierce Panda or Parlophone. And we had backing from Mushroom at the time. So we had the money and we had the team. And in the end, they went for Parlophone. And to be honest, in 1999, I'd have signed to Parlophone. They were absolutely brilliant. They were with Supergrass, Manson, Radiohead, plus access to all the Beatles, Queen, Cliff Richard records. I don't know. I mean, we can go on and on. So Parlophone were fine, Coldplay were fine, Mushroom were fine because they signed Muse instead, and then we were kind of scuppered. But we weren't even scuppered because, we got another deal with Island Records, and the guys there, the main men, Nick Hatfield and Paul Adam, lovely Paul Adam, very nice man. They took me to a pub and they said, right, what we want you to do is just find the new Coldplay. So we had a big old laugh and talked no more about it for 6 months, and then I walked in with Keane, going, the conversation we had about the new and then went through another awful thing where even though my job's to bring them the new Coldplay, they decided they didn't like the new Coldplay, even though I got this new Coldplay onto the Radio 1A list and got them selling out the ICA to 350 people and doing all those things. And then, and in the end, they kind of did a bit of a weird U-turn and managed to sign the band without my involvement, which was fine. I kind of moaned about it to various music industry friends, and then they just came out with even worse stories about the way they'd been absolutely fucked over by managers or agents or something like that. Every single decent human being involved in the music industry has been absolutely fucked over.
Yeah.
And it's always the sociopaths who run it who are doing the fucking over. There's some horrible, horrible people involved. But the end result is last night, when we did the deal with Mushroom back in 1999, they had Muse, Garbage and Ash. And so there we were last night celebrating the Ash midweek, still in the top 10 at the Rough Trade In store. And there's Pat Carr, who's managing them now, and she's part of she was part of the Mushroom setup. Calder Marshall suddenly appears in the crowd. He did the deal with me. He ran Mushroom Records. And it's, it's the whole Ash thing's been slightly bothersome in the sense I've actually screwed over one of my best friends because they're about to sign to Alco Pop Records. And I kind of, I wasn't really that aware of that happening at the time. But Pat did say on one Zoom call, you had me at Fierce. You're part of the Ash family. And again, not purely because they were on Fierce Panda in 1994, but because they played one of our shows at the Dublin Castle with Placebo. I did an NME front cover with him in Iceland. We were label mates at Mushroom. There's so many different interconnections. So in a way, yeah, it's gone full circle. I did think it was kind of weird because I thought, why are you doing a deal with Fierce Panda? We absolutely arsed it up in 1999. You couldn't wait to get rid of us. And they were saying, no, that wasn't your fault. We know, if we'd known now, Calder always says we should have just doubled our offer. But that essence, if you were going to know that they were going to sell out 6 nights at bloody Wembley Stadium and be like the biggest band in the world, it's going to change your focus, isn't it?
Yeah.
So instead of scrimping and saving,
it's amazing. If we can talk about your book, which is brilliant, it's a brilliant book. It goes through the history of what we spoke about today, which is really in depth in the book, and it's wonderful. And there's a lot of band names in there I've forgotten about as well, which was nice. I was going, I forgot them.
It's taken, some people say it's taken them ages to read the book because they've either been crying or they've just been on YouTube.
Yeah,
going,
that's right. Yeah, I did.
About them, even my lovely best friend Nigel, who used to run Ugly Child Records, is and he was a proper indie shop. If anyone walked in there asking for Michael Jackson, he'd be telling them to fuck off to Woolworths on Walthamstow High Street. And even there were loads of records he hadn't heard of in there because they were like, indie-ish bands, but they signed to Polydor. So the reps wouldn't bother with his shop. So he was finding out new stuff and great new songs that he wasn't aware of from 1984.
It's great, yeah. And what I love about the book is, it's shockingly honest about your suicide attempts.
Yeah.
or is it the Great Malarkey or the Grand Malarkey?
The Grand Malarkey,
The
yeah.
Grand Malarkey.
Yeah.
It's just, you're so honest about it in the book. So we should say that every chapter follows the story of the suicide attempt, and it goes on to a part of your life in the book. And just the honesty in the book was just breathtaking. And I got the audiobook as well. To hear you read it in your own words as well just gave it some extra weight. But was that a sort of idea you wanted to put in it about the suicide attempt? Because I think it's a double-edged book in the fact that it's a brilliant snapshot of musical history, but also it could help somebody in the same position realize what happens next if you do these things.
Yeah, because I didn't have a publisher involved or anything like that. I just finished the Johnny Moped book for EM for Damaged Goods. And I think the starting point was just the psychiatrist saying, can you just do some words about your, because they're finding ways of trying to get me to, rediscover myself and all that. Find my inner ikigai, I think, as one person, one medic put it, which wasn't actually, a lot of it was quite inspirational, but towards the end of the ikigai book, it does get quite cosmic and hippie-like, and I'm not for that. And then I just kind of I did a bit about my dad, and then it just kind of carried from there. And I'd kept a diary of my time in hospital just because I wasn't quite sure if I was dead or not. Because it got very, very surreal, and there were just so many weird little moments. Like, there's the whole thing that no one knows who I am. There were about 13. I had 13 visitors, and the rest of the music industry, I was just a little bit ill. No one knew the full story, and one night I could hear the sound of "Fix You" by Coldplay coming from hospital radio down the end of a darkened corridor. And then the following morning, I did one of the medical experts said, "Oh, just to let you know, I was a massive fan of Death Cab for Cutie. Your transatlanticism got me right through med school in Edinburgh." And they was like, "Oh, nuts!" Even there, sitting in my gym jams with a drip, it's still getting the indie fan kids there, which is so that was lovely. And I thought, if I hadn't had moments like that, I don't think I'd have gone for it. You have to see the madness in these things. The ambulance crew member telling me about, going to all the club foot gigs and going to see all the Meteors and all that, and King Kurt and stuff like that. and my wife's got a way of responding to that, which is basically sighing and rolling her eyes. After years and years and years of whether at gigs or supermarkets, holiday resorts, "Hi Simon, I've got a demo for you," So I thought I can see the funny side, and it had to be like that. And I did have a friend of mine who was a nurse. She said, "What, you're going to put it all in there?" And I said, "Yeah, there's no point doing it otherwise. There's no point saying, oh, and then there was an incident I can't really talk about." I just thought, let's all we can do at this point is just be honest. And then, I was halfway through, and then I managed to find a publisher by accident. Mickey from Lush was already signed, and it was basically a brand new music book publishing company. And I'd send them a précis, and then I read small print. It said, "If you haven't got a book agent, don't bother sending us a précis." I thought, well, that's a waste of a good email. And then, but then he dropped me a line a week later saying, "Sorry, it's taken me so long. I've been on holiday, and love Fierce Panda." And so the idea was it was just going to be a book about the history of Fierce Panda Records. And then I took him for a drink, and I said, "Look, there's this thing here," and I gave him an envelope, and in the envelope was printed out. I just printed out the diaries from the hospital, and I said, "Take this away with you. This might just send you running away screaming, thinking I'm a nutter. But just it's up to you." And he came back and he said, I thought doing a book about Fierce Panda, I'd have done it anyway, but this just changes everything. It changes the whole narrative. Is as you said, the kind of the words that people say, sort of, I'm not a brave person at all. I'm a little piglet. I'm a little fantasy little cartoon bear. Bravery is not the word that I'd ever consider myself to be. But he said the same thing. This is just astonishing to be there, and I think probably everything was fine. And then the other thing he wanted to do all the diaries in a block.
Right.
Then we'll do the diaries first, and then we'll do the rest of the Panda story. And I said, that's not going to work. I think that's just too heavy, and it's too self-indulgent. and he was still fighting. And then I had to sort of basically, I think I'd written about half the book by this point. I said, this is the way it's going to work. We're going to have these tiny little bits here, and then we'll have these bigger chunks here. And then he finally got it, but it took him a while. And then now it says the construct is absolutely brilliant. And the weirdest thing is that the hospital bits are kind of, they're the easiest thing to write because they are just literally notes from a bloke sitting in a hospital bed. Whereas then you go into, and here's Coldplay, then that's a lot more the style of the NME.
Yeah. And
especially with the audio book, the hardest bits to talk about are the easiest bits to talk about because they're written in such a, and then I did this, and then I did that, so they're the easiest thing. So there was a real paradox. Yeah. But yeah, and then about a week before the book came out, I suddenly had a real panic attack about thinking, what have I done here? But I just got embraced by everyone. I had so many people just telling me their stories about, I had no idea that they, the things they tried to do to themselves. Jim Benner, who was part of the XFM film, he took me along to a Music Minds Matter Health Awareness Day at Abbey Road, where you had panelists talking about, the general view of mental health in the music industry, i.e. 10 years ago, the major label view was, but we're all crazy because we're in the music industry. And it's kind of, up to a point, but then there's another level of, care and awareness that's needed nowadays. And crucially, I found I wasn't on my own in literary terms. I mean, Mickey's book is grueling. Ian Winwood's book is essentially the Kerrang version of mine. He even ends up in the same hospital bed, having done the same thing to his body. Ted Kessler's book about, how he destroyed the music press. There's a whole, Nadine Shah's got books coming out. James McMahon's got one coming out, all filtering through the same sort of subject, really. So yeah, it was kind of, I found that really, really comforting. And now, and again, sorry, but back to the other thing is, 3 years ago, the whole idea of me doing Q&As with Ash or doing, Q&As with Rock and Roll Book Club, I said, you can absolutely piss off. That's not what I do. I used to get stage fright just putting up the backdrop at Club Fandango in an empty venue. Just the fear, just the thought, I'd have panic dreams about going to a gig with my bass guitar, I'm going to play a show and all that. And I'm thinking, I can't play. I never had those, those stupendous rock and roll dreams where I am Freddie Mercury. I'm just kind of, I'm Teddy Neptune, and it's all gone terribly wrong. It's been, so it's like that. So it's been, but I think it's for the greater cause. I think there's a really important story in there, whether it's, you've got mental health issues, I think it helps. And whether you're in a band, working out where your career went wrong or how maybe your career can go right, that's another box ticked. And if you're in a band and you've got mental health awareness issues, then that's all bases covered as far as I'm concerned. I think it should be, it should be on all music courses. If you're on BIM or anything like that, just read this.
100% as well. And what's lovely about the book, which most people at the time, like yourself, it seemed didn't realise, is that, all your friends around you absolutely love you. And then when you you locked yourself away, basically, they went to find you.
Yeah.
And it's just, you don't realise how much people really care about you until these things happen as well. It's just
amazing. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it was, if the weird thing was, my logic was, if I do this, then we'll get Coldplay we've been trying to get Coldplay to do a benefit gig for Fierce Panda for about 10 years. and it's just never, we're in Argentina or something like that. And I thought, if I do this, then they'll definitely they'll do a massive gig at Brixton Academy, and all the proceeds will go to my family and they'll be looked after, and it will resurrect Fierce Panda. And it was, so there was, a weird way of looking at it, but it wasn't, by doing what I did, I didn't mean to kill Fierce Panda. I wanted to, or ruin my family. I thought this is the best way of helping everyone out. I mean, bizarre logic, but there was logic to it.
At the time, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It's a tremendous suicide note as well. I'm keeping that one in the vaults for, one day, sell it for 40 quid at auction somewhere.
I'll have it.
Yeah.
So I'll give you 30. So
fair enough. Call it 20 then.
So what's next for yourself? Are you going to write a new book? Are you still working with
Do you know what? It did occur to me the other day. So I'm writing a book about crisps for Ian from Damaged Goods, because I've got fed up with writing about myself and talking about myself. So I'm going to do a book on crisps. So that's doing really well. That's going along nicely. And yeah, it did occur to me the other day to think about, I mean, the joke's already there now when I was, because the Ash album's been sort of top 5 all week. We're literally last day of sales today. So I was pumping out, newsletters earlier on and just encouraging to say, you can't put your arm around a download, but you can buy one and help us fend off fucking Taylor Swift and 3 bloody albums lurking over our shoulder. And I was saying last night, this book's already history. This is how not to run a record company. And it's kind of shit. We're about to have a hit record after 29 years. And so, this time 3 years ago, I was in the depths of despair thinking, what's the fucking point? And here we are now, and everyone's absolutely stunned. We did a deal it was only in March the 29th was when we did the deal with So Recordings. And that's the home of, they just had number 1 with Shikari and Placebo and bands like that. And I'd literally, on the way to sign the deal, I literally had a meeting with Pat Carr. And she said, what are you up to now? I said, I'm about to sign a deal with So. And she said, well, we've got an Ash album. And from that, that was 5.5 months ago. We've gone from that. And the album wasn't even finished. They didn't know, they didn't have a title, didn't have artwork, nothing. And we've gone from that to, hopefully it's going to stay in the top 10 today. That's when you think, oh, thank Christ, I failed. Sometimes it's good to fail at things. Unless of course I did die and this is all just some mad post death fever dream. I'm still not quite sure, but exceptionally good times.
I think that should be the title for the second book. Sometimes it's good to fail. I think that's
great. Absolutely. I think that's a good look.
It's an amazing book, and I'll put a link in the description so people can buy it, because if it's like we're saying, if you're a musician, it's fantastic. If you're having issues, read it, because it's fantastic as well. Simon, thanks for your time today. It's been brilliant. I really enjoyed chatting.
Thank you very much.
Chatting Tracks. Let's talk music.